What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? Little town I grew up in had these two car dealerships on opposite sides of town. One Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, shit talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher ups who worked at the dealerships. I graduated law and got engaged to the girl I had been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really ugly and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over property. Canberra is a pretty small city and the legal world is pretty bloody small there too, and everywhere I went I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down. Her too, as it transpired, and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting. To discover that my ex was the other successful applicant, I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be in the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later. We are all gathered for his funeral. We are a big but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up, about the same age as my dad and his siblings who nobody knows. Long story short, turns out it was my grandfather's son. From another family. From another marriage. That went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just the one with this other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her, certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he very suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor which had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilty afterwards and took it out on everyone she talked to and lost a lot of friends in the process. The one guy I worked with was having a baby. He told me about his GF. Yeah, she's pretty big but she's amazing. She's the one for me. I didn't know him very well, but as he talked about the pregnancy and so forth, and I gave him encouraging words and how his life was going to change so much, we bonded a bit. His baby was going to be born right before Christmas. He missed our work Christmas party because his baby was being born. We expect him to be gone for paternity leave, but he shows up a few days later. I feared the worst, that the baby had died. It turned out his girlfriend was lying about being pregnant to spend more time with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the fact that he brought up she was fat for no reason must have meant she was so fat you couldn't tell whether she was pregnant or not. She showed him someone else's ultrasounds. They talked about what they would name their baby, how they'd handle taking care of it, all that shit. I don't know what she thought was gonna happen when 9 months passed and no baby. I guess it's good she came clean though. A more diabolical person would have faked a miscarriage or something. But that was seriously messed up. Shortly after the dude left, so I don't really know how he handled it. 1991. I'm 19. Just signed the lease for my first solo apartment. Just got the first paycheck from my new job. I deposit the paycheck at an ATM. Another first. I'd always gone into the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail and see with horror I have only $1.87 in my account. Way wrong. I should have at least $200. I'd been very careful with my spending. I'm freaked. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police, asking if my ATM card was stolen. I check my wallet and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips, so I didn't use the card often, and tell them I was going to call them anyway, because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card, and your $200, so come down to the police station. They tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card in the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drive down there. Detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM, and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was using it, moving back and forth, as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man then left the ATM, got into a car, and drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in, which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200, and then another ATM card popped out. My card. Bob's card had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his, so he brought my card in the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the crook. According to Bob, it was a man 5 feet 7 inches, brown hair, round gold rimmed glasses. I say out loud so, about my height, my color hair, and glasses like mine, before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in an ATM before, so I was moving back and forth, following the instructions on the screen, filling out the envelope with my account number, punching the amount in, etc. I then forgot to take my card out and just left, because I'm a freaking idiot. I drove away at high speeds, because I was 19 and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him, and left with the money I stole from myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet I still have the police report where I'm both the victim and the perp. I once had a job interview. It was very early in my career, and I was trying to move 500 miles to a new place. I built prototypes and brought samples of my work. It was a 9-hour drive, but everyone seemed so enthusiastic that I figured it was a lock. I did not get the job. I found another job in the area and took it. 6 months later they called and asked me to interview for the job above the one I had applied for. I was given an offer on the spot and worked there almost a decade. In the first few months the people there told me the guy whose job I had, who would have been my boss if he hired me initially, had actually said the samples and work I did was beyond him, and he didn't want an employee who knew more than him. Well, I guess he doesn't have that problem, since they fired him and replaced him with me. One of my good friends in high school started hanging out with this guy from the other public high school in our city, and before long they were basically joined at the hip. She had a huge crush on him and was pretty sure he liked her too, but she'd never had a boyfriend before and was too shy to make the first move. One night they were hanging out and he told her he had something huge to confess. He was gay. They remained close friends. Then a few months later at a party, the guy introduced all of us to his younger, by 1 year, brother. The dude and his brother looked similar, had similar personalities and the exact same sense of humor. Fast forward 20 years, and my friend is happily married to the brother. Her best friend is her brother-in-law, and he and his husband are godfathers to her kids. Sometimes the painful crush on the gay dude pays off. During the last year of my grandfather's life he had dementia and was having trouble keeping track of reality. Before he was placed into hospice he kept complaining about a man that was in his house. He would say that he would come around at night and that he was taking his things and using his stuff. Grandma of course kept reassuring him that she was the only one there. His doctor increased his medications because he was losing touch with reality so badly. Fast forward to my grandfather's funeral and a man showed up that wasn't known by more than a few people in the family. Turns out he was an old friend of my grandmother's who showed up to give his support. In a small town like that it wasn't exactly an unusual thing to have random people show up to the funeral home who knew the person at some point. Well, about a year later my grandmother let slip that she is seeing someone, the guy from funeral. At this point nothing too odd. They got to talking at church and we thought it was sweet. Then a bit later sweet innocent old grandma mentions that it's their 3rd anniversary. Grandpa died 2 years prior. This man was the person that grandpa saw in his house every night. He was the reason that everyone thought grandpa was going crazy. He was the reason that my grandfather was medicated to the point of being a vegetable for the last horrible year of his life. My buddy and his girlfriend took a train to London to see a band play. It was a long journey, almost an hour, with a few stops, and once they were one stop away from London they realized they didn't have the concert tickets. They got off the train, checked their bags, searched every pocket, checked their bags again, and decided to go back home to look there. They got back and found the tickets on the table in the hall of their house and headed back out again. When they were arriving at the station for a second time, they had to wait because there was a potential bomb threat. It turned out there was an unattended bag which was being checked over by the bomb squad. Whose bag? My buddy's girlfriend bag. She'd left it at the station after looking for the tickets. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay, then suddenly their numbers would drop and quit. In one of those, the guy quitting made a big freaking scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other co-workers. At the HR meeting, supervisor is going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing the guy did wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all of this dude's mistakes. The entire time, the guy sat silent, said nothing, just stared at whomever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder and just played recording after recording. Of what, you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening the guy, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete asshole. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their working environment hell to protect his position. Im told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. Was on a flight from Paris to Boston. I had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point a man from a few rows up goes into a bathroom and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out looking up towards where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping, and once she comes back to him, they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They are in there for quite a while and then he comes out and goes back to his seat, and a few minutes later she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats and about an hour later repeat it. The man goes in and then she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane and the woman is standing at the gate waiting, and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her and gives her a kiss on the lips and asks her if she was able to get any sleep on the flight and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Was working a new position in a new store for a company I had worked many years for. I try to develop very good relations with all my coworkers to help the day go by. I joke, I tease, and we sometimes would hang out after work. One of my coworkers, we will call him James, would frequently tease me back. One day he wagged his finger, said our girlfriend, in what I believed to be a teasing manner. Grabbing the moment to tease back, I stated, "Oh come on, James, only girls can get away with the head bob our statements and we all know you'd make an ugly girl." James' scraggly bearded face instantly burst into laughter as everyone around him looked terrified. He laughed and told me I didn't understand it, but I happened to say something really funny. Everyone else looked like the color had drained from their faces. Turns out, James had been born a girl, and I had met him 3 years after his full transition. He was good-natured about it. I told him to compliment his doctors who helped him, because he was obviously living his true life. That made him happy. Underneath it all, I was mortified, and have never made a gender joke since. You never know. I got laid off from a company I had worked for over 20 years. I went in for my exit interview and the hour lady said, "Dwayne, from a site 3 states away, wants to hire you." I said, "I'm not moving that far." She said, "You can just work from home." Now where I was working was a 130-mile round trip commute. I got laid off and ended up with a commute that was from my bedroom to my den. Kept doing it for over 4 more years. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.